far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees. Good day, everyone. I'm Donna Jones Simmons, co-author, co-founder, and the architect of the 100 ABC Women project, as well as the executive producer of our fireside chats. Special thanks to our incredible technical support team, our moderator and panelists, who are the drivers behind our weekly inspirational conversations. Let me now turn you over to our moderator, who will introduce herself to you, as well as today's topic. Thank you.
Awardee recipient, and your moderator for today's chat. In February, we had part one of this topic, and the focus was on what organizations were doing to ensure that employees felt included, especially since many had been working from home. Today, as more workers are heading back to the physical workplace, this discussion is a critical one, especially if we don't want to go back to the way things were. April is Diversity Month, so it seems very appropriate to continue the conversation on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Ensuring inclusion, especially today when many are going back and forth as to whether they prefer to work from home or go back to the office because of microaggressions, macroaggressions, and other incidences of anti-Black racism. It has become easier for many to rethink working arrangements and whether in fact they want to go back to a structured workplace setting. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by 4 amazing panelists who are also 100 ABC awardees, who will be sharing their experiences and strategies with you and with each other over the next hour or so. On the panel today, we have Kathy McDonald. Kathy is a mother of 4 change makers who has resided in Brampton for nearly 30 years. She's also known as the General because Kathy has been a force at revolutionizing the education system and working towards dismantling anti-Black racism in education in Ontario and across Canada. She currently serves as a school board trustee for the Peel District School Board, representing Brampton's Ward 3 and 4, and she received a Harry Jerome Award in 2021 and is a 2022 100 ABC Women's Honoree. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you.
We also have Siobhan Calderbank. Siobhan is the managing editor of talent at the Alberta Investment Management Corporation and founder of Butterfly Ladies Mentoring Program. She's a keynote speaker, recognized expert and leader in leadership and change management, a DEI advocate and an award-winning author. She is a featured book contributor alongside Oprah Winfrey, Maya Angelou, John Lewis, Deepak Chopra, and so many more, all of my heroes and sheroes. She's a Universal Women's Network National Ambassador for Black Women and a UWN Woman of Inspiration Award recipient, one of the top 50 fearless leaders and a top female visionary of the year, and another 100 ABC honoree. Carol Mundley is a leader, welcome Siobhan. Carol Munley is also with us. She's a leader with the Ontario Public Service Employees Union, or OPSU. She's a psychiatric nurse at one of Canada's mental health and addiction hospitals, one of the largest actually. A strong advocate for anti-Black racism, Carol challenges racist and oppressive systems for both workers and patients to create accessibility and safety in the workplace and the larger world of work. She sits on many committees within the world of work and is active in the community as a founder of a grassroots organization that empowers Black women and girls to become change agents. She continues to influence and advocate for the union to be modernized, ensuring that Black workers have their voices heard and actioned. Carol also provides education and training on becoming a certified health and safety representative, and she is also a 100 ABC Woman honoree. And finally, we have Esther Enyalu. Esther is the executive director of Women's Multicultural Resource and Counseling Center, working in the human services field for over 30 years. Esther has been an amazing advocate and leader on issues of gender-based violence, gender equality, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and the economic empowerment of women for financial sustainability and security. She continues to be very, very much involved, and she develops innovative programs and services to service the population that her organization, WMRCC, serves. She is highly committed to ensuring effective and efficient service for women, youth, children, and those from diverse backgrounds, and maintains a work environment free from all forms of oppression. In her view, an intersectional approach to economic empowerment of women and girls requires a strong understanding of how various forms of oppression intertwine and impact the lives of vulnerable women and girls. She values workplace safety, and she views the workplace as an individual's second home. After all, we spend a lot of time in the world of work. So welcome, everyone. So I'm not going to waste any time. We're going to get right to it. And I'm going to talk to Esther first. So Esther, evidenced by the fact that this is part 2 of a very necessary conversation, workplace safety, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has been identified as a big challenge in today's world of work. How should cultural sensitivity be practiced, ensuring harmonious working environments and overall safety in the world of work? Basically, what do you do to create safe spaces?
Matters here. Everything about me is considered within this group. That is what belonging is all about. When you look at some of the school systems and the children, like Black and racialized indigenous children within that institution, they will say, oh, the curriculum doesn't talk about me. So it makes it making them feel, oh, do I belong here? Because I'm not part of that curriculum or what I'm learning in the school. So those are the examples of that belonging. As I mentioned, you read in my bio, workplace is like people's second home. And as you know, due to pandemic, people have been working remotely for the past 3 years. Even within my organization, we've been working since March 11. WHO declare COVID-19 pandemic. We've been working remotely. So we went back in September. It was challenging, and that's what we are hearing from a lot of work environments. It is challenging because people have proven that they could deliver working from home. So what is the difference of bringing them back? Some people want the comfort of working from their home, but depending on the sector you are, especially social service sector, it is crucial that you should be delivering service because you deal with people in the office, but we need to consider maybe being more flexible. Tell people, maybe you do come work from home 1 day a week or 2 days a week and work in the office 3 days. So it depends on the work environment. Each work environment needs to decide what will work for me, what will work for my work environment is not what will work for your environment, Marie, not what will work in Carol's or Siobhan's or Kathy's environment. So it's all different. So you need to know and also create a work culture because I believe in every work environment or industry or institution, organization, it is the HR and the leaders, management team that sets the tone, that determines how the work culture, what it looks like, or how the work culture will perform, or what it looks like. And every individual is unique. Some people have childcare issues. Some people have elderly parents. Some people have family members who have gotten sick. So each person is different. As a management individual, you have to look at each person accordingly and accommodate people depending on their situation. And workplace safety I am big on that because we need to make our work environment to be a safe environment where everybody can work and thrive. People are human beings. And when you have human beings, conflict is inevitable. You can have conflict. What matters is how that conflict is handled. Just like in a relationship, people have misunderstanding, people have the opinions, people have their differences, but what matters is how issues are resolved and not to practice preferential differential treatment. Just create a work environment that is supportive of the individual working there and promote that. And that's what in my career, I try to promote that. And so that's what I have to say, contribute about this. And I know that within the conversation, we will talk more about other issues.
So treating people the way that you want to be treated and the things that you would expect from others is the same way that you need to be treating the folks that are around you. So exactly. Thank you for that. Thank you, Esther.
And having zero tolerance for racism, discrimination, and all those things. When it happens as a management individual, you have to take the bold step to handle the issue. Do not sweep it under the carpet because it festers. I believe in when things happen, deal with it to resolve it. Don't shy away from anything. I know some people don't feel comfortable to deal with certain issues, but that is the meat. Behind you being the leader, you deal with the good parts, you deal also with difficult situations. So it is not something we should shy away if there is any situation that happened. And we need to always consider people's lived experience because people carry sometimes trauma with them based on their lived experiences.
Thank you, Esther. And we'll come back to some strategies that could assist folks who don't feel comfortable coming forward, who are afraid to come forward. So we can address some of those as the conversation continues. So Kathy, let me come to you now. Over the years, we have seen so many concepts come and go, nice words. When something happens, you have great posters with name days, short-term programs in schools, creation of committees, all kinds of things. So how do we ensure that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are not just buzzwords or the sexy words of the day? How do we ensure that these words and their meanings are embedded into the organization that you work for?
Thank you so much, Marie, for that question. I mean, I could spend the whole 2 hours just speaking about that, but first I'd like to acknowledge that I am actually participating from the ancestral treaty lands of the Mississauga and Anishinaabeg, also known today as the Mississauga of the Credits. And I like to think of 3 important strategies to ensure that we move and shift all the reports and glossy posters and the buzzwords into action. And in my case, it must land on the desk of students, because that's how in my realm, I determine success, right? So I think, first of all, we need to be courageous. You have to put on your armor suit every day because, you get nukes thrown at you. So, but all kidding aside, I think that a lot of times when we have these reports, and I always say that, especially as Black people, we are the most studied species on the planet, bar none. And we have a lot of these start and stops, these, let's go study this, they present it, and then there's a lot of hoopla and it fizzles. So we have to first of all break that cycle. So I go to the table. I don't always assume. I know one of the things people say, you must always assume positive intentions. Well, I don't always assume positive intentions because, quite frankly, I really don't care about your intentions. I care about the impact, right? So that's my focus. I'm not worried about your comfort. I'm worried about the impact, right? So I think that when you, first of all, ensure that we have to focus on the impact and implementation of all these different initiatives, and you center that, I think that it's important. The second thing that is very important to do is to ground everything in the law and human rights. So I'm very unapologetic in a lot of my stance on issues as it relates to equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? Because I think it goes beyond a moral issue. I think it is a legal issue because at the end of the day, all students, including Black students, have a legal right to an education. So I ground everything in the law. I'm not a lawyer, let's put that on the table, but I do a lot of research. So it goes into looking at our policies, for example. And people talk about, systemness, right? That, it's almost like it's a boogeyman. But at the end of the day, it's important to recognize that it's individuals that make these rules up. It's individuals that uphold the status quo, even when it's racist, right? So again, using that as my guide, I one by one go through policies and dismantle them. Question. It is asking questions. And in my line of work, you get a lot of staff reports. So it is the ability and to say to staff, you're not necessarily it's not a personal attack. Well, it isn't a personal attack. It is genuine concern or trying to truly understand the report, what it means for children, especially Black children. I think it's also important, for parents to understand their rights and to educate parents. A lot of us, I know, I'm an immigrant from Jamaica. We don't have this trustee kind of level of government. So a lot of parents don't even understand the role, right, of trustees and it. And even from the employee perspective, a lot of times too, we come from cultures where it's intimidating, right, and not acceptable to challenge the status quo or your boss, right, because you live in this fear of your job. But I think if you understand your legal rights, then a lot of those anxieties will dissipate, right? So also, I think it's very important, and I remember one of my mentors, Zanana Akande, always says, you need to call out those fools. It doesn't matter the color of their skin, right? Because a lot of times, again, we have, and if you look at this, how systems have thrived for so long, they weren't developed to really protect the average Joe, certainly not to protect Black folks, right? Or Black students. So you always have these what I call token Black people that are in the system to uphold the status quo, right? So it's even more difficult when you're in a system where you have to go up against people like that and challenge what's happening, what's really happening in the system. But, I think it's important to call it out and in every time. And it doesn't mean, I know sometimes it feels like you're being combative and you feel like, oh my gosh, here we go again. But I think when you have to center your why and just remember that, right? And use that as the anchor and say, it's necessary, it's necessary. So when I give an example, I remember once, just being in a seminar on equity and inclusion and diversity and the importance of having, diverse voices at a table. And at the end of the symposium, there's a vote on committees. So a white male puts his name forward to be on a committee that's totally white. And then a Black female, me, I raise my hand and say, hey, I'd like to be on this committee. And if they vote, and they vote for the white male. And I'm thinking, we just spent like 4 hours talking about the importance of having diverse voices at the table, right? So after the vote, I just said, I hope you guys reflect on what just happened here. After we've spent so many hours, right? Things that make you go, And then calling it out. And it's not a matter, oh, I'm a spoil sport, I didn't get elected. But I called it out to say, if you are truly committed to equity and diversity, how the heck did that just happen, right? And I think it's, again, calling out things like that, looking at, and I will say I'm hopeful because at Peel, we have an amazing director who has started the journey in correcting and really doing bold steps that a lot of people won't be happy with. So we have, for example, rewritten almost all our bylaws, right? And their equity and inclusion, diversity is in the center of everything in these. Having accountability measures. Because it's one thing to have a pretty poster and have all these plans, but if you have no one person who is, say, okay, Marie is the lead on this initiative, and no change management when you're changing a whole system, no accountability measures, then nothing will happen. Because, if you are just going along and you have the poster and you say, okay, when this happens, there's no way to hold somebody accountable, the status quo will prevail. So it's putting in place measures to ensure that, for example, employees and students have a portal now that you can report acts of trauma and violence and racism, right? So I know my time is running out, but I leave it at there. But I think it is, you know, so getting beyond the politeness and worrying about other people's comfort and being true to the work of inclusion, equity, and belonging.
Thanks, Kathy. You said something about normalizing things, and it's so important for children to see the correct way at the very beginning, normalize the correct way, because what we have been, you know, subject to is not the way that things should be. And so if children are getting that right at the beginning, it does help for the next generation. The other thing you talked about was, you know, to speak up. I think it's easy for some people to be able to do that, but it's difficult for others who don't have those supports. The supports are not there, and they're fearful that if they speak up, they're going to lose their jobs, right? Those reprisals and reprimands are real to a lot of folks that don't have that support. So a lot of the times people sit there and suffer in silence. And yes, it's individuals that make those decisions, that write those policies, that write those procedures, but they are also, you know, surrounded by systems that push those policies and procedures to continue along those same lines that they have been on from time immemorial, right? Rather than to make change. And I give you an example. I was part of an organization, not the CLC, but part of another organization who we did some of that same work in changing policies, changing procedures, changing bylaws, creating a harassment statement and a harassment policy. And what we found, we thought this was really good because now the organization is in good stead to deal with some of these issues. What we found is that longtime staff of the organization, I'm trying to be very diplomatic here, longtime staff of the organization pushed back because now they were getting called on things that they were doing that was discriminatory, that was racist, etc. And they kept saying, well, the policy was fine before, we need to change it because it's not working now. No, it's working. It's working. It's calling you out for the behaviors that you've been, you know, putting forward for the last 10, 20, however many 100 years. And so, yeah, there is that back and forth and pull and push in terms of, am I doing the correct thing? What if I want to speak up, but I can't speak up? Who do I go to? So all of those things come into play when we're dealing with changing of policies and changing things to a point where we believe and we agree with what's being put forward so that it can change society.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I start with being courageous. That's the first thing. And if you are afraid to speak up, surround yourself with people. Go to the person that could, you know, advocate for you. It's really important because you should not suffer in silence. And I think, you know, the change is like if everybody suffered in silence, we wouldn't have any changes, right? So go to that person, even if you don't have the voice, and community, because there's a whole community of people willing to support you too.
Thank you, Kathy. I should also say, I should have said it at the beginning because we didn't have the other piece, that I'm also joining you from Takaranto, or Treaty 13, which is also land of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, and I am grateful for the opportunity to work on this land and also stand on the shoulders of my ancestors as we do this work. So thank you, Kathy. Moving along to Carol, because Carol, a lot of what Kathy said can fit in terms of the union movement and where they are and where they need to be. So we know that the labor movement has been doing work on diversity, equity, and inclusion for quite some time. Can you share some of the things that the movement has done and is doing to ensure DEI? And are there other things that the movement needs to be doing? Because we know that the labor movement is nowhere near it needs to be in terms of looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that the folks that are already there feel a sense of belonging.
Thank you very much, Marie. And I too am coming from the Miss of the credit, the Anishani, and I'm also standing on many shoulders of my ancestors who were brought here as a result of this transatlantic slave trade. As many people might be aware, the labor movement is a business. It is the one thing that governs a lot of workers and a lot of policies that we see in workplaces. Great work that that continues in changing systems. One of the big challenge that we are finding is that the labor movement at times have been slow to respond, slow in addressing issues of discrimination, and even more specifically around anti-Black racism. It is not by chance that you have these corporations that they will put policies in place that are not always acknowledging where individuals are and where the organization itself are. For example, when you look at one of these the labor movement that something as simple, that should be simple, as creating equity seats. And when we talk about equity, what does that look like? Most would think that, you were looking at, having racialized folks at the table or having specific seats for racialized individuals. However, it doesn't. When you talk about equity, you're talking about women, you're talking about francophone, you're talking about the 2S LGBTQ communities, you have the disability communities, you have all these communities, including that would include racialized individuals. So when you think about equity seats that my union is presently looking at, you have to compete with all the other, everyone is put together, everyone who is seen as seeking to be treated equally or in an equitable manner. All these groups are put together. So how can you, at what point do you expect that in someone who is indigenous, someone who is Black, someone who is racialized, their voices will be heard? There's no real place or opportunity for these groups to actually step forward or to be actually having a seat at the table. So presently, I know it took following the lead of the CLC, and I have to go there, attempting to follow the lead of the CLC. It has been more than 7 years since the equity seats have been put to the test and brought to the convention where all the decisions are made. And every single year that is brought to the convention around equity seats, it is turned down. Every single year. Initially, it was only it would include Indigenous and Black. And it was turned down every single year. This year is the first year that it will be put. Actually, let me correct myself. Last year was the first year that the decision to include all other committees were made. And because all the decision was made, because again, we need to get this seat passed somehow. Initially, we asked for 2 seats. And so when we found that we were not reaching anywhere, the decision to actually include all 8 committees, instead of the 2, that's the only time that the larger body was actually agreeable to actually putting this forward. So just think about that. Who still holds the power? Because again, when we're saying for the equity seat, you must have a Black and an Indigenous person. And it is led, the questions are asked, why? Why do they need a lift up? Why should they be placed at the table? Why not go through the same process that everyone else does? So again, although the labor movement have made many strides in so many different ways, we're still far behind. We're way behind the poll. To say that we're leading or we're being successful. And so it will be interesting to see next week, as a matter of fact, next few days, what the decision will be, how people will respond to it, and if it will be approved. So when we look at the policies that governs whether it is the labor movement or individual workplaces, it's the same thing. There's no difference in how folks are treated. I know until we get to the point where every single committee that has influence, that has the power to influence change on a systemic level, unless you have a seat at the table, as long as a Black person does not have a seat at that table to influence change, you'll never have changes. And so how can you start to unravel and to dismantle those systems? It's going to be difficult, because I know when my employer turned to me and said to me, well, we have no one who's Black in HR. Think about it, in HR, there's no one Black. Yet you have cases of discrimination that comes forward. How can you expect a fair and equitable treatment, or even for it to be understood what a Black person goes through on a daily basis? How can you expect that when there's no system in place? There's no system in place to address these. Being told that, well, this is why it is, and we will educate, we'll provide training, we'll provide education. And we're saying this is still not enough. You cannot make a commitment that you're committed to dismantling anti-Black racism. And think about it. On one hand, you're saying, lots of words, nice words, right? Yet there's no action to go with it. At what point do you say enough is enough, and we need to see the action, because we're hearing lots of words, but there's no real action in place. And so I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but what it means is you have to start this unraveling things from within. We recognize you can't stay on the outside and actually make real and meaningful change. So you have to find a way to either push your way in and actually demand a seat at the table. And sometimes, and I can tell you, I heard it earlier when Kathy talked about, people who look like you, who actually have an opportunity, a real opportunity to make meaningful change. But again, when you notice that it's really about fulfilling or carrying out the agenda of the people who have actually created a system that is oppressive. At what stage do you say enough is enough and you stop accepting the status quo? So, so for me, I know one of the things that I'm adamant about is ensuring that, providing resources for individual. In my workplace, it's creating, gain support for a Black employees resource group. That's one of the things that we started to do, and ensuring that, and again, it's building trust, because trust is always a factor where no one wants to be seen as the bad one, the bad guy. right? The person who is, a troublemaker. And truth be told, a lot of times folks don't even want to be associated with me because I'm seen as that one who, no one, I'm the agitator. I'm the one who creates, rock the boat at all costs. But again, someone has to do it. And, I will take the hit for folks because again, I recognize that somewhere along the line, someone else did it for me. There were other people who did it for me. And so you have to have one of those people at all times who, you can count on, you can go to. And, and I heard it earlier where it's really not being silent on issues. For the first time ever, we have Black folks who are actually stepping forward and actually saying enough. And again, I must say, I was happy that I was there to support them going through, because again, it's not never, people talk about safe space. There's never any safe space ever. It's about you being brave enough to take those first steps.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. I'm not going to comment on anything that you said. I'll hold my comments because I really want to get to Siobhan. Siobhan, as an experienced leader in talent and DEI, how do you ensure that DEI is integrated into the systems that you work with and so that everyone feels a sense of belonging? And you can comment on some of the things that Carol and Esther and Kathy have said already.
Thank you. I mean, I really appreciate the fact that all of us are here and wanted to acknowledge those that we are on the traditional territories of many of those nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. And today, I had the opportunity to do these amazing women, so thank you. And when we think about talent systems and the procedures and policies that we have in place, they really were not initially built with us in mind. And so when we look at how do we make everybody feel included, we got to go back and start there with looking at these policies and procedures with a diversity and equity and belonging lens, which sometimes means we got to rewrite the policies. We have to acknowledge, look, we made a mistake here, or, our intent was to be inclusive, but it wasn't. And I think sometimes just even that acknowledgement can go a long way. When I look at talent systems as a whole, when we're looking at promotions, we're looking at performance management, we're looking at determining is somebody have more potential than another, and you start to see the same group of individuals being called over and over again. This is where you have to have the courage to speak up. And I know, Carol, you were saying, you have to have the courage to call it out. And it's a really hard thing to do. I'm not going to lie. When you're in that room and everybody's talking about it, and so sometimes you have to just pause and take a deep breath just for your own self. But then when you're calling it out, you're looking at, can we take a minute and just review all of the people that we have here? And I say stick to the facts and always look at it very objectively. So if we look, how many men did we promote and how many men did we say were potential versus women, right? Just facts. Of all of these individuals, how many of them are racialized? Again, stick to the facts. How many of them do we know identify as part of maybe to us LGBT or plus, or have a disability that we're aware of? It's harder to distinguish those ones, mind you, because oftentimes it's not visible and not everybody feels comfortable saying it. But racialized, you can see it. So then we start looking at, well, why do we keep using, let's talk about the language. When we're talking about certain individuals, or do we keep saying that these people have a problem because they're too aggressive or too assertive, and do they all sort of look the same compared to those that we say, oh, they take lots of courage and they're really, they're assertive when they speak as opposed to aggressive when someone else speaks. So sometimes I say, let's take a look at the language here that we're using and pause for reflection. And then, who are we as an organization? What do we stand for? Is our role to actually try to balance and ensure those that didn't have an opportunity get an opportunity? Are we actually putting our racialized individuals first and taking a moment to really reflect on how do we help them get to the places where we want them to be so that it is equitable in nature? And then see what happens there. But you know what? The truth of the matter is none of this will go anywhere unless the most senior person in the room is on side. And if they're not on side, this is where you're going to have a lot of uphill battle to be in. And I've been fortunate enough to be in an organization where the CEO is completely committed to equity and ensuring that we really are looking at it with diverse lens. And it is a game changer when it comes to the conversations behind the scenes. And that's the type of leadership that you need in terms of the support. And when you don't have it, it is difficult to bring it up because then you are looked at as like, oh, here we go again. Maybe the rebel rouser, you're the person, you're the thorn in the side that just got to be talking about this stuff all the time. Can we move on? But it's really important work that needs to happen. And when we look at promotions and opportunities, even when it's just like, let's say women, how many times do men get opportunities because they say, well, this is probably not the safest place to send this woman if you're going to go to another country, or she has kids, so maybe we need to worry about her over, and then they get passed over for promotions versus we have technology. Does it really require you to do traveling? We have a whole bunch of resources to us to be able to help and assist. And so why are we not putting those into place? And the biggest resource that we have is really mentorship and sponsorship behind the closed doors. So when we look at all of our talent within the organization, are we providing them with mentorship opportunities so that they can get those skills that they need in order to advance in their career? Are we actively sponsoring them behind the scenes and giving them the opportunities? So, as someone in that space, I have to create those programs and I got to be living those values as well as being able to push them forward. And I think that is so important for us to be able to get to those levels of equity, but it's not going to start without having the courage to be able to speak up and say something.
I'm envious, Siobhan. I'm envious because you have someone at the top of your organization who gets it.
Yeah.
Most people don't. Most folks don't have that. And so it's really, really difficult for them to get supports. I remember, going through the crap that I went through for 12 years, and white women who were there to support my election bid in 2002 kept saying, no, we don't want to say anything because we don't want to be treated the way that you are. So they know that the treatment is different. They just don't want to do anything about it because they don't want to end up in the same boat. And then hence you get, oh, you're such a strong woman. You're so, well, it will eventually come back to you. So after I leave or anybody else who's being mistreated leaves, they're going to look for somebody else. And if there's only white women there, then they're the ones that are going to get hit, or whomever is left there are the ones that are going to get hit. So everybody needs to participate in calling out the crap when they see it, and also participate in making the changes that need to be made if we're going to have a society that is truly equitable. So yes, thank you. I really, really appreciated your comments. Right back to what you were saying, Siobhan, we are all on this call accomplished, or on this webinar, accomplished Black women. One would think that we have been able to deal with the various things that are thrown with us on a regular basis. I know that I've experienced the feeling of not knowing how to, not feeling supported doing it, because it is very difficult to overcome when you're in that hole. I want to go back to Kathy. Just because you are the general, and I know that when you put your foot down, everybody stops and listens. So have you ever felt excluded doing this work? And if yes, how do you deal with that isolation? Because it is isolating, because when you are targeted or pointed at and say you're the difficult one, you're the angry Black woman, you are the one that's always defensive, people start to move away. So how do you deal with that with that feeling and that isolation?
So I'd say absolutely. At times it's very isolating. And in fact, I remember being told once that they were going to isolate me and I'm going to be the only one standing. The community is going to get tired and I'll be the only one standing. So part of upholding the anti-Black racism in systems is that specific act of isolating you. And I think it's particularly traumatic when you have participants that look like you, that are upholding, right, and participating in trying to destroy you. I've been told, oh, you go ahead and you be the pit bull, I'll be the puppy dog behind you, and working behind the scenes to undermine, right? So it's very isolating. But I think it's important to surround yourself with the people who are like-minded, right? So you can find, for example, in Black bodies, so Black staff, and legitimately they'd be afraid because they have to think of, I always tell staff, I can't pay your mortgage, right? So I don't want you to do anything to jeopardize your job. So it's literally meeting in the shadows. There are Black staff who support me, but they're afraid to be seen with me, right? You also have to get allies. So there are white people who are absolutely willing to do the work, and you have to utilize, and they are so empowered because they're not afraid of retribution, right? So you utilize their skill, and they are very, very helpful to the process, as well as in my case, being from Peel, the South Asian community, because there's a lot of anti-Black racism in the South Asian community. And I think it's prudent to get allies from the South Asian community to tackle it, right? And I think that even reaching out to community too, because it's important for the oppressors to realize that I'm not alone. There are a community of people that are supporting me. And I know, for example, the work that I'm able to accomplish in Peel, I couldn't have done it without the community. So having that community voice is so important. And I think educating, always explaining the why. So because it's very easy to kind of paint you as this crazy, angry. Every name and description you gave, Marie, I have been told, right? And it's very easy for people to paint that picture. So, but when you explain to people, no, but this is happening, and the importance also, I always maintain that you'll never eradicate any form of discrimination or racism until you tackle anti-Black racism. And I heartily believe that, because at the center of it all, if you look at any equity-seeking group, if you're Black in that group, you're still worse off than the other members of that group. So I always say, and if you look at even all the initiatives that have been spearheaded by Black people, they rise, the whole community rises, right? You look at in every sector, you look at immigration, you look at even education, all other equity-seeking groups rise as a result of the advocacy of Black people. I think that to combat isolation too, it is important to do your homework, right? To study all the policies in place. So even, when you are initially, you may be standing alone, but if you are grounded in all the policies and you have all your facts, then other people will come on board. They're like, oh, because you have some people that are afraid to come out initially, but once the train starts rolling, they're ready to jump on. So I think that's very important. But most importantly, I would end by saying to always be grounded in your why. And my why is a deep-seated belief that education is the only vehicle that you can truly transform and improve kids' lives. And I believe in the brilliance of Black children, right? As a mother of 4 Black children, I was a Black little kid trying to get an education at one time, right? And I've had people tell me that, oh, and these are leaders, you talk about unions, these are leaders in the board, would say, oh, but these students are savages. That's why somebody doesn't want to work with them, right? And they said, but I was once a little Black girl trying to get education. When did I stop being a savage in your eyes, right? And we have to really call it out and change that narrative and story of how they see us and humanize our precious Black children, and self-care, because I have seen too many, and I can name people doing this line of work that have died, right? And the latest being Paula Ilimadi, that basically got a brain bleed whilst typing a delegation for the board. And that's a testament of how traumatic this work can be. And I think it's so important to practice self-care. And that's how, you deal with the isolation, but never, because they're counting on you to give up, and never, never, never give up. And I always tell people, as a Jamaican, I have Nanny of the Maroons blood in me, right? So I'm not giving up. So, yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Kathy. And calling it out, you hit the nail on the head. We need to call it out all the time. So Siobhan, back to you. I want to talk about imposter syndrome. And I know that you have dealt with it. I want you to talk a little bit about what that is and give some folks some tips as to how to overcome it, if you can.
Yeah, for sure. We've had some really great conversation right now about being put into situations where we aren't feeling included. And that's because of this, the systems, leaders, the politics, a whole bunch of other things. But sometimes we as ourselves can make ourselves feel like we're not included. And with an imposter syndrome, for those of you who may not necessarily be familiarized with it, it's when you feel this like intense feeling that no matter what you do, you're never good enough. And even when you get to high points of success, you're high performing, you are amazing, you still cannot actually internalize any of those successes. And what was really interesting to find out when I was doing some research on this is that both Einstein and our beloved Maya Angelou felt the same thing. And when you look at all of like her successes and his too, it's like, how could you possibly be feeling this? But they do. And so many of us, when we feel, and I actually believe, and research will support this, is that when you are in those equity seeking groups, you feel it even more intensely. So when you're the only in the room, sometimes you're looking around thinking, how did I get here? Did I only get here because there was a mistake in the application system that they just randomly pulled my name? I wouldn't have actually got this. And you start to downplay a lot of your successes, a lot of the things that you've done and your achievements, your awards. And that's really a shame, because the fact is, like, you really have done quite a lot in your career to get you to this point. So in terms of answering the second part of your question, which is what are some of those tips, I want to summarize it in 3 things. So the first one is to be able to reevaluate. So reevaluate, like, what is really happening here? And is this really truly me feeling this way? Or is the system actually creating this? And it could be a bit of both. Sometimes you may be put in a new situation or a new role, and you have to be able to objectively say, I'm in a growth mode and I'm learning and I'm developing and I'm doing my thing. And that's okay if I'm not perfect. The other is to make sure that you are looking at it, refocusing to your values. What's really important? Is it time for me to speak up because this means something to me? Or is it time for me to just reflect on what is happening? And then you let your values guide you. And then the third is to stop ruminating, which is stop allowing all this negativity, monkey chatter nonsense to actually permeate into who you are and tear you down. You are amazing. Every single one of you who are listening to this right now, who are on this panel, have an abundance of talent, and the capability to be able to move forward and do all the amazing things that you do. And know that you are capable and you do belong there. You do deserve a seat there. You do deserve to be there on your own merit. And if they can't see that, then pull up a chair, create your own chair and put it down and let them hear you roar.
Yeah, that's good.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Let them hear you roar. I asked that question, and I'm passionate about your answer to that question, Siobhan, because there are many, many of us, and I'm putting myself in there, who have been there.
Yeah.
And then you're told you're incompetent. So it's not just you think that you are based on the way that you're treated. There are individuals that are being told that on a daily basis, and they're not incompetent. You know, they do know their job, but they're made to feel this small. And so, you know, we have been talking this whole time about how to make people feel like they belong, like they're included. And Carol, I know that you do work as a psychiatric nurse and you hear the stories. You are in the world of work where people suffer in silence, which creates other issues. Oftentimes, we don't acknowledge that all of these things impact our mental well-being. We take care of our physical health, but oftentimes don't recognize that we also need to take care of emotions and our mental health. You see the effects in the work that you do every single day. Black workers are hurting. How is this manifesting itself? And Carol, for many of these feelings, many of the feelings that we are talking about were there before COVID. But can you speak to our mental health or Black workers' mental health in this post-COVID era, pulling on some things that have already been said by the panelists?
Thank you very much for that question, Marie. It's an excellent question and quite fitting. You know, one of the things that I would say, one phrase I would use is, it is actually a public health crisis. It is a crisis that no one wants to talk about. And it's almost as if it's a non-issue. And I'll give you an example. Recently, I was asked the question, my position slightly changed where I became the president for my my local. And the comment and the question was, what's happening? What has changed? Because now you're having specifically Black women, but it's not only women who are coming forward. You have workers who are now coming forward and actually raising their hands to say, I am not doing well. And this is happening to me. So now, and I'm thankful that I'm there to actually hear it and to actually encourage them to actually, because for me, not just hearing it, it's actually being there with them, to stand with them and to let them know that they will never, ever have to deal with this or address it on their own. And so we talk about, you know, I remember this one individual. I remember he probably 17 years ago when he started, you know, bubbly, very pleasant, outgoing young man. And I never forget, you know, when he called me and he said, because he was much younger, he said, Auntie, I am in trouble. And that trouble meaning that, saying that he's in trouble was to say that he was having issues at work. And when I met with him, because again, the fear is that, you know, the fear is real where you don't want to talk over the phone. But meeting with him, it was recognized that this was not the same person who I met when he first started. He was broken in more ways than one. And it was all as a result of the workplace. What was happening to him in the workplace? So fast forward, it was me supporting him, but not just me supporting him. It was finding means and ways outside of the organization for him to be supported. Because again, you know, we talk about self-care. I know what my capabilities are, and also recognize what my limitations are. So for everyone who I come in contact with, is to ensure that they're first safe. Safety, personal safety is always imperative. It is for them to feel validated, that what they're experiencing is not just a fiction of their imagination. And it is to make sure that they feel safe and brave enough to actually begin that conversation. And so for us, it has always been, how can we ensure that systems are in place to protect the workers, to protect them being in the workplace. And for me, I'm putting it back to the employer, where the employer has an obligation to ensure that every single worker is protected in the workplace, protected from harm. And so when I tell my employer that they about their responsibility, you know, we all know what their responsibilities are, but for me, I'm saying it because I want to make sure that they hear it as well. And it's to make sure that the system that exists are there to protect these workers. So can you imagine, you know, you're already dealing with the stress of work. Now you have to face with the possibility of being off from work. What happened to your pay? Is it something that you can afford to not to get or to have it impacted? So people stay in the workplace because again, they cannot afford to have their financial abilities be impacted. So when we see that, and the minute I see it, I'm flagging it because again, their financial status must never be impacted. So putting it back to the employer to say, you have that responsibility. And yes, it means that we're pushing it, we're fast forwarding it, because the employee must never ever be out of pocket because they were injured at work. You know, and so it's also about educating individuals for them to understand that physical injury is one, but you can never forget the psychological injury that's taking place. And so it's really that education piece that's a big one for folks, where they recognize they maybe not at first, and it's really you continuously educating them around what their rights and responsibilities are. And part of their rights is actually to be protected. And it's really educating them, continuously educating them around that. And supporting in every single way possible. You know, we talk about folks who were working from home during the pandemic, and then being faced with coming back to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk about that, and we don't even not recognizing that folks, while they're off, they had to adjust somehow to working from home. The isolation that was felt while they were working from home, it is real. You know, they're isolated. And so can you imagine they adapted the best way they knew how, and then they're brought back to work or being forced back to work, you know? But there's no way we can ever go back to the pre-pandemic system, because again, we saw where that system was a broken system and it just did not work. Once the pandemic hit, it did not work anymore. So why is it that the employers are not fast forwarding to become more innovative, to create systems that not just look at hybrid system, but look at how can we get the best and the most for workers? If they need to work from home, why are they not looking at that? So these are things that as workers, we have to start, because again, the employer don't always listen, right? They're not listening to us. So how can we start creating systems that forces them to actually listen? And that's through the government bodies, right? I'll stop there.
Thanks, Carol. I've been so caught up in the conversation, I'm not even paying attention to the chat, but Kathy said something in the chat that I think that is really, really crucial. Not only rock the boat, turn it over and make sure that we learn how to swim. Again, learn all the issues that we need to learn so that we're not dependent on that system. We're not dependent on those that are in power or in leadership that don't understand and don't want to make the necessary changes so that we do feel a sense of belonging. I also hear from Gloria when I think it was when Siobhan was speaking that you hit the nail on the, actually it was when Kathy was speaking, you hit the nail on the head. Everything that you said, people were in the chat agreeing the whole time. Gloria also mentioned under mental health, support of family members who don't believe in mental illness. That's also a big thing. When you say that you know you're not well, you're not feeling well emotionally, they laugh, push you aside, and give you all kinds of things that you should do rather than taking how you feel seriously. And can you imagine how someone like that feels when they're getting the same treatment at home that they're getting at work, right? So there's so many things that we have to maneuver. Daisy agreed with Gloria. There's a stigma in our community about mental health where people don't want to talk about it. The good thing is that the discussion is taking place openly these days and things are slowly changing. And they are. Every day there's a webinar on mental health and Black mental health. So, it is so important that we continue to have these discussions. I'll get back to folks in the chat in a minute, but I have a question also for, I just lost my my list. Just give me 1 second, folks.
And also, not only having policy, is holding people accountable to make sure that those policies are being implemented. Sometimes people have good intentions. A lot of institutions and organizations will tell you we have diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, but are you implementing it? Is it working for you? So a lot of people will tell you we have this policy, it is all good in paper, but when it comes to practice, it's not happening. So it's like, my advice and suggestion is like every institution, every work environment should have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that will be holding, especially if they have union. Carol has been talking about union. If you're working in a unionized environment, the union needs to hold the employer accountable to make sure that these policies are a living document, not only just we create it and we put it, is sitting on the bookshelf and nobody implements it, nobody reads it. It is about making sure we create policies, we make sure that we are using it. It is being implemented. It should be a living document that when every person is hired or student or volunteer, they must be obligated to read the policy. And also, I always say that everything depends on the management team. If the management team of every institution, every organization is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, everybody will follow. But if it breaks from the up, you wouldn't expect people from the bottom to do anything because the people up or the executive or the management team is not holding people accountable or themselves are not using what policies they implemented or created. So everything starts from the top. So what I will recommend is that in every environment, every workplace groups, people should put in practice diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know we've had enough about diversity, equity, inclusion within the past 3 years. It has become hot topic due to what happened in 2020. So it's like we have to make sure and keep encouraging people to continue to practice that. I've heard what some of you said about isolation, and some of us who talks openly, you get call names, you are angry, and people sometimes feel uncomfortable talking about issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, or when you bring certain issues forward, it is so difficult for some people to accept. and to admit it and to discuss issues. But it is something that people should not shy away from. It is something that people should always discuss. Be honest with people. We shouldn't shy away, especially when we notice something. It not only in our work environment, in the community, the groups, the settings we belong to. Please address it. Don't let it go. Sometimes people will tell you they don't feel comfortable or they are scared they are going to be attacked. I've been attacked so many times, but that will not still stop me from raising issue that I feel that is necessary to be put on the table for discussion. So I will encourage everybody, let's discuss issues of race. And also, we as Black people, we experience anti-Black racism. And also myself as a woman, not only Black from continental Africa, there is also resistance because people don't, it's like, oh, you are not supposed to be assertive or to be talking or to be, there is a way people think you should be, the stereotype of whom an African woman should be. You should not be speaking up, you should be so submissive, that kind of thing. But that's who I am. I have a big mouth, especially when I see something that is disturb me. I always feel it is important to discuss it. And also, not only, sometimes also you see all this, I know Kathy mentioned that within us, there is diversity among us. And also, sometimes when people you expect to back you up, don't back you up, and also do something to you, it hurts. But in any case, we have to be honest enough with each other to discuss things. We shouldn't shove anything on that table. It's just having that level of comfort. It's not, you don't hate anybody. I always say to people, we might have differences in opinion, but I don't hate you. And I hope you don't hate me too, but it is a conversation that we need to have. That's why I'm raising it. So, and also policy, people should make sure diversity, equity, and inclusion is incorporated in their policies or bylaws or constitution, whatever you call it. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. It's clear. It's been clear based on what's been said thus far that people feel a sense of belonging when they're valued, when they're seen, when they're heard, when they're affirmed. And in a way that you can, ensure that diversity is there when you're working for organizations, diversify where you hold your meetings, diversify the types of foods that you bring into meetings, have lunch and learn so people can get together and meet other folks in the organization. Clear based on what everybody says, lived experience needs to be valued. And we have to look at our intersectionality. We're not just one thing, right? We need to make sure that everything that is done in the world of work and in the community values our experience and all of who we are. Kathy talked about importance of training, as did Carol and Siobhan. It's important for board, staff, leadership, all to be trained because it's them that need to lead by example, right? Ensure psychological safety. These are all things we've heard today. Diversify your hiring panels. Who is recruiting, where you're recruiting, all of those things to make sure that the workforce and our organizations actually mirror what is out there. Governments have done reports for decades. Let's now try and implement the recommendations. We don't need any more reports. We've heard that several times. Let's implement the recommendations that are here. So we've heard a whole host of things from our panelists today, and I want to thank them. What I want to ask you all, 30 seconds, give me a wrap up. What do you want folks to take away from today? I'll start with Siobhan.
I guess for me, at the end of the day, I want you just to be able to know that there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. And you're also not alone, right? There's so many of us who are trying to advocate and to put Black people first, as well as other equity groups. And you can lean on the resources, lean on each other, and know that if it becomes a lot, and the space is really hard to be in on a daily basis, mentally, emotionally, physically, it's exhausting. Take a minute for yourself and really do seek the resources, not only for yourself, but for others too, and to make sure that you're whole so that you can actually be out there and advocate well for those that really need it and deserve it.
Thank you, Siobhan. Carol?
Thank you very much. Finding support wherever you need to, whether it is in the community, at work, and however you need to. Self-care, we constantly hear about self-care, but ensuring that you have the right type of care, right type of self-care, not just for yourself, but also for your family and your people who are closest to you. Because again, you will always need that, and don't ever lose your voice. Always speak up, and speak up in whichever surrounding or whichever environment you feel safest.
Thank you, Carol. Esther?
Yes.
30 seconds.
Yes, please try to be yourself. It is only you that can define whom you are. No other person can tell you whom you are. Sometimes people want to call you names or say different things, but be yourself, be authentic you, and let's build the community than destroying the community. And while we do the work is so difficult. We should engage in self-care. Know who is your support network. Talk to those people who are not supporting you or talking negatively or trashing you. You don't need them. Say goodbye to them. Thank you. Have support, good support network. Thanks.
Thank you, Esther. And the general herself, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you to everyone. And thank you, Donna, for inviting me on this panel. And I just like to add to the lifeguarding scenario, to the boat scenario, that also you should be a lifeguard so you can save the people that are worth saving to when you turn the boat back over, right? But seriously, I think when you look at things like this, the reports like the Stephen Lewis report, that's almost, well, it was 30 years old last year, and things really significantly only started changing for Black students, I would say, within the past 2 years. And it underscores the importance of not only training, but holding people accountable. Because you can train the wazoo out of people, but if you don't hold people accountable and have like ironclad accountability measures, nothing will substantially change. And I think it's also, when Esther spoke about, the big mouth, I think it's a label you should embrace and wear with pride, because, in Jamaica, we have a song, we say action, not a bag of mouth. So you can use your big mouth to make sure you have action, like substantial change. And at the end of the day, when you focus on your why and your purpose, and in my case, it's Black children succeeding and getting an education they're legally entitled to, I really don't care, a flying hoot about all the naysayers. And it's just believing in your why. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. I want to just add, as I've said before, all of those things that we need to feel a sense of belonging, and I'm speaking to organizations out there, make sure you make the necessary changes to your policies, to your boards. Start with the top in making the changes. Make sure your executive and your boards are trained to deal with all the things that we deal with when we're talking about equity, diversity, belonging, inclusion. Make sure there's inclusive recruitment, safe spaces, give workers the opportunity to provide feedback, connect with workers through lunch and learns, through webinars, value the experiences, and invite folks to be part of the preparation team. Ensure that they're at the table to help eat, prepare the food, do the grocery shopping, not just bring them in for dessert and cleanup, right?
Yeah.
So that is what we need to, that is the message that I want folks to take away from here. I thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to continuing this conversation later. And please join us next week for another Fireside Chat. Thank you all
Excuse
so
me, Marie,
much.
I just need
Yes.
to say to cover my, just for legal reasons, it's important to note that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Peel District School Board. All my thoughts are my own. So in no way am I representing the Peel District School Board in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kathy. And I'm sure that
goes
everybody
here.
else on the panel feels the same. They're speaking as their individual self, not on behalf of their organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thanks,
That
everyone.
was well done, everyone.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never